Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Okay, well, here we are. All right, one more struggle with the mute button as I'm racing to meet our deadlines. Good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, May 25th, 2023. Time for another show. Not time for high schooler to make his way to high school. I don't know. Not up to it today, and apparently just, man, I don't know. I would say I don't want to be too critical of what's going on over the school, but this last week of school for the seniors doesn't seem to be particularly well planned, and there's nothing going on that would require their presence. There's nothing they can do to address any grades that they've got. The grades are in, and, that's not unusual at the end of the year, but also there doesn't really appear to be an adequate plan for activities during the day. Nothing to attract them to come to school. There's an activity today that they offered, but that they, I guess, planned, I guess incorrectly, although I'm sure we could have done something to help with the planning, but not enough room on the buses for today's activity for all the students who want to participate, and those who wanted to participate but are left out because there's no space on the buses have no alternative plan for their day at school. And, that affects morale to some extent, and that affects their ability, let's say, to get themselves up and out of bed for the last couple days of school. But there's still 2 days left, plus the long weekend in the middle, which is also a weird plan. But pretty soon, I guess this is really it. So there's no scramble in the background. No, that's not to blame for the disarray in the morning here. That's my own fault. But coming to a close, the era of having to deal with getting the high schooler out the door, as you all know. Okay, so what have you been spending your last couple minutes before 9 o'clock Eastern time doing? I, of course, have been attempting to review the news via social media, where others are digesting it for me. It's always more interesting that way. This is kind of interesting, actually. I ran into I still have to kind of get used to saying things this way, a toot on Mastodon that it didn't surprise me, but one of those things that shocks nonetheless, even though you can't technically say it's much of a surprise. I mentioned to you the other day, and I think I even pocketed for discussion at some point. Is this it? I don't know. I'll have to look around. But I had mentioned the fact that Amanda Gorman's poem that had been read at the Biden inaugural has fallen subject to the Florida complaining Karen ban. And that's exactly what it was. As it turns out, it was the complaint of one parent that was successful in getting the reading of the poem banned, at least in younger grades, at least age restricted, as I understand it. And I saw this tweet from, I guess I'm not certain of his background here, Dr. Brad Rosenheim, who I think describes himself as a climate scientist, but, nonetheless has broader interests in the world than just climate, as many of us do, and made this interesting observation and got a hold of what looks to be the initial complaining documentation, such as it is, that triggered the whole thing. And it's astonishing in how little has to be done in order to get educational materials banned. Dr. Rosenheim here tweets, "This is the complaint that got Amanda Gorman's poem recited at Biden's inauguration banned in a South Florida school." And a point is made about what gets filled out. I'll tell you about that in a second. The complainant, it's a one-sheeter. Okay, and the worst part of it, Dr. Rosenheim says, is that the school district actually acted on this. One complaint gets a book banned, but numerous schoolhouse gun slaughters can't get guns banned. That's America for you, and you see where he's coming from on that. So I'm taking a look at this one pager here. All you have to do is fill out this one page, and you don't even really have to fill it out, as it turns out. You fill out your city and state and zip code. Most people can do that. Complainant. You check one, individual or represents an organization, right? So she checks individual. And then from there, let's see, the next couple of questions here that are filled out, title of material in question, The Hill We Climb. That was the name of the poem. But get this, author, publisher, like, why bother getting the facts right? And why not get it wrong in a more insulting way? Who's the author of the poem? Well, you know, I don't remember offhand, but if you know the name of the poem, you can kind of Google it, and the answer is Amanda Gorman, but not Karen's answer. Karen's answer is Oprah Winfrey, because a black woman read it. We know that much, so I know two of them, and one of them is Aunt Jemima, and they don't use that anymore, and everybody knows that will be called racist. So what's the other one? Oprah Winfrey. I don't know where they get this. I mean, I'm sure Oprah Winfrey had some nice things to say about the poem and about the poet on her show, and maybe she saw that, but that's basically it. So you go on, you have to check off, is it a book? Is it an audiovisual item? Is it something else? Would you identify it? And then there's this little check the box. What would you like to do about this media? Check one. Leave the challenged materials in the classroom or library media center, but allow students to use alternative materials approved by school personnel who require the use of the disputed item. 2, limit the educational use of the challenged material. Explain. It's not going to be that one because explain. Or 3, remove the challenged material from the total environment. Check. That's what we want to do. Now, the next question is, to what do you object? Please be specific. Cite pages or sections, blank. Like, I'd say, okay, to me, procedurally, I'd be like, well, if that's not filled out, that's going in the garbage. It doesn't even come to the council or whatever. If you can't say to what you object, or even what page or anything, no. Why do you object to this material? This one did get filled out. Is not educational and have indirectly hate messages. Pages 12 to 13. So she actually cites actual pages there, but she doesn't do it in the right spot. To me, that's still procedurally invalid. But how do you like that message? It's not educational and have indirectly hate messages. Well, speaking of not educational, that's not grammatically correct. That I wouldn't disqualify it based on that. Did you review all the material? Yes. Are you aware of professional reviews on this material? Answer, I don't need it. 5, what strengths do you perceive in this material? Blank. For what age group would you recommend this material? Not for schools. Question 7, what do you believe is the function of the material? Cause confusion and indoctrinate students. That's the function. And number 8, in its place, what material would you recommend that would result in the same outcome? Blank. Signature of complainant, by the way, scribble. Worse than most things I've ever seen. I don't believe that they spent time verifying the signature on this, and it should also be invalid under the voter registration rules. And then the date. And that's the entirety of what you have to provide to get a successful ban done for you in Florida. Misidentify the author. Claim that you don't need to review any professional writing about the material. And just say, it caused confusion. Have hate message. Indoctrinate. Scribble, scribble, scribble. Ban. So there you go. Just sort of keeping you up to date. In case you want to ban anything like all news about Ron DeSantis. That's right. Why not? I want to ban all the newspapers that carry it. I don't want a total ban on the newspapers, but I think librarians should have to cut out any article that mentions Ron DeSantis in Florida and throw it out. And let's see if it happens. Just say, it not educational, have ye no hate message. And see whether that's enough to get it. You can claim that the author is Oprah Winfrey, by the way. That apparently helps a lot, too. Greg Dworkin is here. He's not the author of the poem. He's not Oprah Winfrey. You could play her on TV if you wanted to, I think. I think you have that range, Greg. How are you doing?
We're good. Okay.
I
did find a Oprah interview of Amanda Gorman, which played on Apple TV and is all over YouTube.
Okay.
So perhaps the person saw it and was confused, like Arnie Schwarzenegger in that movie Twins. You couldn't tell which one was
right.
which.
He's a robot, though. I saw the other documentary, so it doesn't really matter.
we could give that the benefit of the doubt. But I thought Mark Jacob, the former Chicago Tribune author, had the best quick summary of what's going on here. He said, "Look, Republicans love their guns and they're afraid of poems."
Yeah, that's quite remarkable.
Yeah.
All right,
so
that sums it up.
That pretty much sums it up.
Okay.
So let's see. Are there other things we can sum up quickly?
Nah.
What he exactly said, to give him credit, because he wrote it beautifully: loving guns but fearing poetry is so Republican.
Yeah. I don't know.
That's what he wrote. So, it's one of those facts. You can't argue with facts.
Yeah. I can't even comment.
Adriana McIntyre was looking at a different subject. She was looking at Medicaid and what's going on with that, because there was a Kaiser Family Foundation poll of Medicaid recipients.
Oh, yeah. Ban them, by the way. That's Oprah
Well,
Winfrey
the Republicans are trying to do that in Congress.
Okay.
Right?
Excellent.
And she says there's a lot of interesting, important things in this survey. For example, Larry Levitt had pointed out 65% of Medicaid enrollees say they have not had a change in circumstance that would make them ineligible.
All right.
And the big question is how many of these still eligible enrollees will fail to navigate the renewal process.
Oh.
Two findings taken together are important. 1/3 of enrollees haven't updated contact information.
Okay.
And about half of Medicaid enrollees prefer to receive renewal information through modes other than the U.S. mail.
Uh-huh.
So the point is, it's time to renew, and will they? It's at state level, but really are the states doing any efforts to try to help people to do that? Well, it depends whether you're a red state or a blue state, I suppose. But not all blue states are, perfect in terms of how they administer things. Adriana McIntyre says, I recently talked to a state about their outreach modalities,
I like the word.
and it was well below half of enrollees who had a contact preference other than postal mail, which is distinct from actual underlying preference. So states also vary a lot in terms of how web or mobile friendly their client portals are.
Yeah, I can imagine.
For example, my understanding is that Texas has since remedied the issue, but it used to be the case that clients couldn't reset their passwords.
Oh.
Also alarming, only 1/3 of respondents said they would look to the marketplace for coverage if they lost their Medicaid. 15% say they would just be uninsured.
Yeah, well, I mean, the market has changed since, the passage of Obamacare. So don't give up entirely, but I certainly understand the sentiment, and it's a residual understanding of the market. I was priced out of it last time. Things have improved to some extent.
But, the other part of it.
But they may be right. They make
that is a big part of this that people don't necessarily appreciate is the role of brokers and how the enrollment brokers help people get on, and that's unwinding.
Oh, yes, right, okay.
So she says one thing I hadn't realized until recently, hat tip like a girl, is how central agents and brokers have been to marketplace enrollment, which will matter for unwinding. They assisted almost 2/3 of enrollees during 2022 during open enrollment.
Yeah, okay.
So it's a nightmare to navigate. If you don't have help navigating it,
yes. I mean, I say the marketplace changed. The price changed if you can get there. But yeah, I guess the complexity of the marketplace didn't change much. Okay.
This next item, in sort of a smorgasbord of things to talk about before we get into deeper delves on topics like Ron DeSantis' launch. This is Jen Taub noting that when Jean Carroll went back to the judge and said, look, what he said again, we need to do something about this. And the judge issued some pretty strict rulings, one of which said, quote, government counsel promptly should begin the review of deposition and other discovery material and such other material as may be appropriate that the United States has not previously considered and the parties have suggested may be relevant to the substitution issue. And, of course, not being a lawyer, I read that and said, what the heck is that? But luckily, George Conway came along and translated it and said, here's what happened. The judge told the Justice Department, you folks sure you want to spend taxpayer dollars on defending the lies of an adjudicated sex abuser? Take a moment and think that through. Maybe you want to withdraw from this case.
The time may be upon us for them to do so.
And Jen Taub said, "Oh, that is a perfect translation."
Okay.
That's exactly what's going on here.
Well, good. I was wondering why they were doing this in the first place. I mean, it was one thing when he ran the Justice Department. Now that he does, and I also get that they didn't want the optics of simply reversing themselves immediately upon Biden taking office. But now it's been some time. People have forgotten.
And they also have an inherent protect the president kind of mindset.
Yes.
No matter who the president is, fill in the blank. But
true.
The judge said, in this particular case, you might want to reconsider that whole mindset.
Yeah. You don't. Well, that's true. And I mean, if it's about the institution of the presidency, do you really want to hang the stain of being an adjudicated sex offender on the office of the presidency?
As part of no matter what,
Yeah.
So I thought that was a pretty good move by the judge, whose name is Lewis Kaplan, by the way. He also laid down the law, says Jen Taub.
It's not Oprah Winfrey.
Donald Trump has until Friday to file a response to E. Jean Carroll's letter from Monday, and he has until June 5th to reply to her motion to amend the complaint, which is to say, he's still defaming me, Judge. He has to pay even more money.
Very short period of time for him to respond. Yeah, that's true. And she upped the stakes because, I mean, about the dumbest thing you could do is within 24 hours of being held liable for libel and the sexual assault, go on national television and repeat the offense. But that's
I love that part. I didn't do it, and right now on national TV, I'm going to do it again.
Yeah, that's right, just so everyone knows.
Okay, I hire lawyers to get me out of this sort of fix, but that's their problem, not my problem. I know what I want to do, and I want to do what I want to do.
I wonder whether what's his name, Tacopina?
Tacopina?
Yeah, whether he
wasn't involved in this particular...
no, not in this this court proceeding, but rather, my question was, did he at any point, I assume that he knew about the CNN town hall coming up and just said, not my issue, and didn't even try to advise Trump either not to address that or not even to go on. But
well, he blamed it on Hunter Biden.
The whole screw up,
everything
that he went on there. All right, sure, why not?
Hunter made me do it. Different topic here, but sticking to short pieces. This is a new MU law poll that came out yesterday looking at how people felt about the Supreme Court. They think it sucks.
Okay.
But this particular tweet, MU law poll, partisan differences continue to be large on the Dobbs decision. Among Republicans, 58% favor the decision. 42% oppose it. 42% of Republicans oppose this decision.
Oh.
That's a large amount.
Yeah.
Among independents, 37 favor, 63 oppose, and among Democrats, it's 1189. Benji Sarlin looked at this and said, from a national poll, Dobbs unites Democrats, splits Republicans. That's pretty much all political decision-making right now flowing from these numbers.
Okay.
So that's why Republicans are toying with the idea of a compromise, 12-week ban.
Oh, I see.
That's the compromise between 6 and 15. Is it going to work? Of course not. But that's why it's even being entertained. They know their own party's split, and they're trying to figure out how to bring them together. And so it's really interesting watching them try to do that maneuver.
Yeah, we'll see.
So at the same time, there are other reports, and I mentioned several times, I think, on the show this week. This will be the third time I mention it this week. But Republicans are really upset that the ending of Title 42 didn't wind up with a surge at the border. They were counting on that to counter Dobbs. And they
thought it had to be factually true to say so? That's odd.
Well, if they had lots and lots and lots, well, Fox is saying it anyway, but it doesn't have the same salience if it's not true.
Fox could be in reruns, though. We're not sure. That could be happening. Yeah.
Fox, of course, isn't the only group that's having problems. CNN is tanking in terms of its numbers. This is a piece from TNR, the New Republican, as we used to call it, by Alex Shepard. Chris licked his wounds.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, that really lends itself to, that. All right. Yes.
CNN is tanking after their unforgivable Trump town hall. Lick's master plan is already run aground, as has the news channel's ratings. CNN's brass defended its disastrous early May town hall. I just love the idea that it's disastrous is just built into the factual summaries now.
Good. But why can't they do that for more things?
With Donald Trump on jury. Exactly. So it's not hard. If you want to know how you figure out that Trump was indicted and, a adjudicated sex offender, you could write it like this. Donald Trump, the adjudicated sex offender, had a rally, yada, 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 So not that hard.
Yeah.
And they defended this disastrous early May town hall on journalistic grounds, arguing while he may present unique challenges as an interview subject, for example, serial lying, general incoherence, a literal attempted coup, it was ultimately better to hear from the frontrunner for the Republican Party's 2024 presidential nomination than it was to ignore him. We obviously can't control what he says. That's up to him, said David Chalian, the network's news director. Now, I know David Chalian for a long time from Twitter. He's a center-right sort of, a straight-shooter news guy, and he's their political director. He's been the political director at various places. He's a terrible political director.
All right.
Here's an example. What we can do is prod, ask questions, follow up, and try to get as revealing answers as possible. And either he has no idea what he's talking about if he thought that was possible.
Right. You remember who we were talking about, right? The interview is Donald Trump.
Yeah. So, one of the two. The scenario, as we know, with the gift of hindsight, and to be fair, the gift of foresight.
But really sight in general.
What transpired during the chaotic town hall. It's a really nice article. Moderator Caitlin Collins made a game effort, but as usual, he simply steamrolled over her while an audience packed to the gills with supporters hooted and hollered in support.
Yeah.
Many at CNN suspected this would happen because they had all lived through 2016 and they all knew the score through hard-earned experience. It's hard to see how America was served by the spectacle of lies that aired on CNN Wednesday evening, wrote the network's media reporter Oliver Darcy.
Right.
And CNN aired it all. On and off it went. It felt like 2016 all over again. It was Trump's unhinged social media feed brought to life on stage. Now, maybe CNN's leaders knew at this and didn't know how it would play out. Maybe they were fully aware and this is what would happen, and they allowed it anyway. But either way you slice it, they don't come out looking good. But if you put yourselves in the shoes of a cable news executive, brain full of worms, conscience fully in bad for America, but incredibly good content mode, you might be able to imagine a twisted vision in which this town hall was a win-win. By holding the town hall, CNN was kicking off presidential primary season. Elections mean ratings boost, and no one has ever boosted ratings quite like Donald Trump. Sure, he might be a threat to the Republic and the institution of journalism, but he always brought fireworks and eyeballs. But another factor is the fact that CNN was in the midst of a significant rebrand. Under new CEO Chris Licht, the network was attempting to establish itself as a neutral, nonpartisan space and theoretically hoover up viewers who were repulsed by the increasingly ugly partisan politics on display at rivals MSNBC and Fox News, as if they were equivalent.
Okay.
The network wanted to win back independent viewers, whoever they are, and woo the conservatives and right-wingers that had soured on it during the Trump years. And what better way to demonstrate that than by hosting Trump himself? Well, none of those plans worked. The town hall was a hilarious and predictable journalistic and political disaster that brought CNN mockery on the day of the event, and I would point out before the event, as we were doing. But now that some time has passed, we've learned it was also a business failure as well. A paltry 3.1 million viewers tuned in. This shouldn't have been a surprise. Trump simply doesn't have the drawing power he once had, and a sizable portion of the public is clearly sick of him.
Right, okay.
And I think that's absolutely true. I mean, I won't watch. I know what he's going to say.
Yeah.
So, why watch?
I don't know. Why? I'd be curious to know whether they stay. I assume they still have the policy in place, like we won't show ISIS beheading videos.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they stopped
3.1 million
making
viewers.
Them, but yeah,
okay,
I'm just curious.
Put this in
that makes news.
A really hot Super Bowl game will get 115 million viewers.
Okay.
Just in perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not a huge win.
Even 3.3 million watched the halftime show. Probably.
More than people. More people watch the halftime show than the actual Super Bowl.
Yeah. There might be more viewers for the Puppy Bowl.
Yeah, exactly. So Trump simply didn't have the drawing power, but there appears to have been a rather serious knock-on effect In the weeks after,
again,
the
that
former
word.
president appeared on CNN, and we cover this with some nice charts and graphs. The network's ratings have plummeted. In fact, its ratings last week were the worst the network has posted since June 2015, when Trump came down the escalator. The network averaged 429,000 total daily viewers from Monday through Friday. That's less than half of those of MSNBC and Fox News. It's basically they're competing with OAN.
Well, they better look out. You're going to end up with OAN in your cable
Well,
package
OAN
and
may surpass
CNN
it.
out.
So this is a catastrophe on every level. It's also a repudiation of the shift Slick that tried to oversee at CNN. The generous take of his vision is he's tried to make the network a home for people who are sick of the combative and shrill partisan politics, whoever they are.
With a Trump town
But,
hall?
if that's the way you feel, you're going to be watching other cable shows. You're not going to be watching news at all.
Wow.
So it's hard to square, they say, courting a weird audience of neutral and dispassionate news consumers while simultaneously doing what cable news does best, gin up cheap conflict, create bombastic moments out of nothing, generally exacerbate every single division in America. The ungenerous take is that Lick simply hoped he could make a few blood sacrifices to the right and voila, everything is fixed. But no. You can't wrestle the platonic ideal of a cable news audience made up of equal numbers of Democrats and Republicans. It's a chimera.
Yeah, well, you certainly, I don't see how you produce it by airing a town hall in front of exclusively Trump supporters. What would bring the other half of the audience?
Right. Now, during the 2016 election and in the early days of the Trump administration, the network did everything it possibly could to try and woo Trump voters. It brought Trump supporters on panels, even though these people were typically as honest and well-balanced as Trump himself.
Yes.
Rick Santorum, for example, great hire.
Aha.
Right? And the network bailed, and Trump's entire approach to politics involves disregarding basic reality, and that's a fact that Chris Lick forgot, and now he and CNN are paying the price. Now, that's all a setup for talking about Ron DeSantis' launch and how media handles stuff.
Okay. Well, that is a good setup then. We'll be back to deliver. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. It was pointed out to me during the break, I have inadvertently now made a promise that we were going to deliver on the second half of the wind-up here, but all I really meant was we'll be back. Whether we're going to actually deliver when we get here, I don't know.
As far as the delivery goes, you have to step back and think of Trump's CNN town hall as the kickoff to his campaign.
Yes. Okay. He meant it that way.
So contrast that with the kickoff to Ron DeSantis' campaign.
All right.
On Twitter.
Yeah. All right.
Yesterday, which was a complete and total disaster, but of a different sort.
What people are saying. I don't know why.
Well, yeah. We'll find out. Elon Musk tweeted. People are saying that this is the biggest story in the planet yesterday. Actually, that's not true. Tina Turner was a bigger story than this. Way bigger.
Yeah, yes.
But aside from that, you only get one announcement campaign launch. Trump got what he wanted. He got a chance to lie live in front of an adoring audience for an hour and some minutes. That's what Trump wanted. He got what he wanted. The rest of the country was appalled by it. So I guess Democrats got what they wanted.
Okay.
DeSantis didn't get what he wanted. He wanted to do something new and different. And the whole concept, the whole angle behind Ron DeSantis's campaign and candidacy is that he's not only MAGA without Trump's legal baggage, which may or may not be true. Well, it's probably true in the sense that nobody has legal baggage like Donald Trump. DeSantis will have his own suits, First Amendment and otherwise. But, basically he just wants to be mean and nasty and on the libs. He's doing absolutely nothing whatsoever to reach out, just like Donald Trump, beyond that base in order to try to convince more neutral voters to consider him.
Okay.
And he's incapable of it. Now, his whole strategy for winning the nomination is, since this is a Republican primary, owning the libs is the thing. I will make my entire state suffer to own the libs so that I can run for president.
Okay, yes.
It may or may not be working out. I mean, Florida's living costs are extremely high. Insurance is unaffordable. He's ignoring the state while he puts in place things that are going to hurt other Republican candidates all over the country, like abortion bans, as we talked about with Dobbs and Roe.
Right.
But, he's focused on winning the primary and figures he'll deal with that later. And part of that is a Mike Dukakis competency argument, which got shot to pieces by him going on Twitter yesterday to announce in an audio, not video.
Yeah, I don't understand. But okay.
Well, right. Don't understand because it doesn't make any sense, which, by the way, crashed the servers and just made everybody made fun of him.
Hey,
so here are the headlines from the New York Times and the Washington Post this morning, just as an example. DeSantis announcement is disrupted by Twitter malfunction. Governor Ron DeSantis, Donald Trump's strongest challenger, entered the 2024 race, but a live stream announcement with Twitter's owner Elon Musk was marred by glitches. It was glitchy.
Okay.
Musk's crowning moment gets a disastrous start. That was the second article. The Florida governor's announcement in a live stream was supposed to be a triumphant moment for Elon Musk. Instead, it exposed Twitter's weaknesses, and by the way, Musk's as well. Yes. Washington Post, Ron DeSantis' presidential campaign kickoff on Twitter plagued by technical issues. It was an awkward start to a long and expected campaign that has hit roadblocks this spring, even as many Republicans still view DeSantis as the most formidable primary challenger. The political playbook, one of the gossip sheets, handled it like this: why DeSantis' disastrous launch matters. In other words, this consensus, it was a disaster.
Yes, it appears to be the case.
All over Twitter, for example, there were just pictures of rockets blowing up for some reason.
All right.
Probably the Musk connection.
Yes, I'm sure.
Failure to launch. It started not with a bang, but with a whimper. Mm-hmm. Instead, for 20 minutes or so, there were false starts, dropped audio, strange hold music, and not a peep from DeSantis.
Oh.
At one point, a disembodied voice was heard making a grim assessment per NBC's David Ingram and Matt Dixon. Disembodied voice in the background. This is going to be a stain that Trump is going to leverage for at least a few weeks. That's what they said live.
Oh. All right.
Hot mic.
Nice.
Then the original Twitter Spaces event was aborted, and a new one began with roughly half the listenership at first. We'll spare you a full readout.
Okay, I didn't really what you said doesn't matter.
Everybody from Joe Biden to Nikki Haley to Asa Hutchinson to Donald Trump reveled in DeSantis' misfortune. Even Fox News couldn't resist making a crack and promoting the network's own interview.
Yeah, I mean...
And the funniest one was Biden's campaign.
All right.
They tweeted a URL which took you to his campaign where you could make a donation. Mm-hmm. And they labeled it very simply, "This link works." It was really very clever.
All right.
And so you could step back and say, well, ha, this has 15 minutes worth of... No, it doesn't. Because the whole Mike Dukakis competency thing, this is like Dukakis in the tank.
Yes, I have seen that comparison made, as a matter of fact.
Right. And so I haven't seen it, but, that immediately struck me.
Oh, okay. So you're like Steve M. on Mastodon.
Very cool.
Mr. Nice Guy. Yeah, who says exactly that. Did the SAT analogy format. Dukakis is to tank, as DeSantis is to Twitter.
There you go. So Team DeSantis immediately tried to spin it as evidence that the governor's immense popularity broke the internet. But let's be clear, this was a bad night for DeSantis.
Get out of here.
It was supposed to be a tabula rasa moment, a chance to reset the narrative. Instead, a different narrative is taking hold. Politico. The risk for DeSantis is the prospect of the botched rollout forming a narrative and cutting against the very argument he's making to Republican primary voters that he's a competent alternative to the chaotic presidency of former President Trump. National Review. In theory, one advantage of an unconventional announcement in a Twitter space conversation is its informality.
Yes.
And this had me thinking, if he's just going to give a stump speech, what's the point of doing Twitter space?
No,
of course,
yeah.
Claire McCaskill on MSNBC pointed out, you also give up the visuals, the adoring crowds,
right,
the smiling in front of whatever it is you want to do. Ronald Reagan in front of the Statue of Liberty when he announced.
Is that where
you're crazy? Air Force One in the background. You're crazy to give up those visuals. It's all about visuals for television.
Yeah.
And DeSantis either doesn't understand it or, as Claire McCaskill said, perhaps even the more important thing, he had people on his team, high up, maybe running the campaign, maybe his wife, who thought this was a good idea. And those people are still running his campaign.
All right. Awesome.
And
it is.
That's a huge point. This is not something that goes away in 15 minutes because he's still married to the person who's advising him on 99% of how to do things, including how to kiss babies and how to shake hands.
All right. Well, that's not working.
She's very good at it. He's not.
How is that possible?
She's a right-wing nut job even more than he is. But, the point is it's not working. And maybe you need to expand your tight little circle. But that's not easy when you're a control freak.
Maybe he's not allowed to. Okay. I mean, Mike Pence, he wouldn't be allowed to.
That's the worst possible world, right? A control freak who's not allowed to. That's Ron DeSantis, and that's probably why he's never comfortable in his own skin.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that would drive you crazy. I want to control everything, but I can't because I'm being controlled. It'd be very odd.
New York Times, executive competence, core to the DeSantis campaign message, was conspicuously absent. I can do all of these things. Watch me do the Martha's Vineyard and get sued. Watch me do the Disney thing, lose and get sued. Watch me do Twitter and have it crash and burn. Mike Dukakis in a tank.
Yeah. Well, that was an odd idea. Now, all the losses in court is something we should probably be keeping track of because it was similar to what Trump was doing, constantly being beaten down in court. But
right. Well, that'll be for the general because, again, the Republican audience doesn't care. So I could understand why that's something we will watch, but they won't.
I see.
NBC, Schadenfreude, the German word for taking pleasure in another's failure, might understate the glee Trump and his team felt. Trump allies shared images to represent their excitement, glass of wine, laughing to tears emoji, and separating the signal from the noise. Of course, it won't sink the DeSantis campaign, but did it really matter? Yes. As Jonathan Martin, our colleague, shrewdly observed, there's two major questions. How badly does this hurt his first 48 hours of fundraising? And does this give DeSantis' inner circle the strength in hand to push him to engage with the press rather than sticking with his bubble of friendly media? Of course, that is a self-serving observation since Jonathan Martin is part of that press. DeSantis hates the standard media even more than Trump does because the standard media are people who, by their very nature, are either extroverts or trained to be so that they can go and talk to strangers about weird stuff.
Right.
Everything DeSantis hates. And so now he's forced to talk to these people that represent everything that he hates and everything he isn't. And that's why he'd rather talk to an online person. Let's give it the most talented and polite and anodyne description of Elon Musk.
Yeah, right. That's an interesting point. I mean, I guess it could have been I guess he could have sold it as some sort of strategic thinking to say, audio is your medium, where we don't get to see you twitching and glitching, a robot that you are. But then I guess the next thing, I'm sure that they were thinking, and that's the hot medium, and all the kids are using it, and and of course culture war aspect to it too. That was only a plus for them, but it has to be a proven media that's got a stable platform that can work. And since Elon Musk took over and fired all the people who run the place, they should have been able to calculate that the risk of it crashing was enormous, and that there would be people who wanted to crash it on purpose. I mean, he should have been on, I don't know, somebody's radio break, should have gone on InfoWars, I guess. So, they don't crash anyway.
They approached the money issue saying, doesn't matter, he's got a ton of money.
Okay.
He's spending it on people to go knock doors at places like Iowa, New Hampshire, and again, part of the money is to make sure he's not one of them because he turns people off when they meet him.
Right. Not that
but as far as the other question, does this really matter? They say, Politico says, it's too soon to say, but we're left wondering, who exactly was the target audience for this event supposed to be in the first place?
Yeah,
as politicians often like to remind us reporters, Twitter isn't real life. It's not where voters live. And that's true. But Twitter is where journalists and other political obsessives spend an inordinate amount of time. It has an outsized impact on which narratives take hold in national media. And that's why the DeSantis gambit was so risky. If you do it well, you get covered. And if you do it the way he did it.
Right. I mean, that's the downside
How do you reset
to it.
The reset?
There was on paper it was a good pitch, and maybe his wife thought he was more competent or something, but
not doing audio
to say
and not doing it on Twitter Space.
I think that was ultimately a terrible idea. But if the pitch being, this is the medium of influencers. They're all going to be there. They're all going to see, and when you hit it out of the park, they'll all have to take note. But the risk of it being an utter disaster, even if he was great, of it being an utter technical disaster was just too much to take on. You shouldn't have done it. And even if it is a disaster not of your making, it wouldn't matter. Twitter is, while it's, the platform of influencers, or once was anyway, it's also the place where you will get brutalized if anything goes wrong. You'll get brutalized if things go right. So, that wasn't wise.
DeSantis used to have a very competent political operative named Susie Wild who ran his campaigns.
Yeah, that name came up the other day, right? Didn't she
had a falling out. She's now working for Trump.
Okay.
If she were in charge, she never would have allowed this.
I see.
Because if you know Ron DeSantis, you know this is not his medium.
There is no medium for him.
Right. I mean, we need to make sure Ron DeSantis gets out there in an event that plays to his strengths. So let's have him at a turkey pardon ceremony like Sarah Palin.
Right, yeah, maybe.
With the turkey in the background getting their head cut off. Only in his case, that's the message he wants to send.
Yeah, right.
Right? That
We're
you could do.
Turkeys.
But to go on a baby kissing contest and a smiling personality sort of event?
Yeah.
No, that's not his strength. You don't let him do that. And at the same time, modern American politics is visual.
Yes.
So the entire idea of doing a mimeographed campaign by slipping flyers under people's doors in the age of TikTok.
I'm sure that's why they argued for Twitter, and I don't know why they thought he could do it. It was an interesting idea for somebody else.
Yes.
But
you could argue. Look,
and a big risk.
Let me give you the big picture here. Trump has completely abandoned Twitter because they kicked him off, and he's still mad.
Okay.
So it's a vast empty space you could occupy.
Yes, that's an argument.
If I were Tim Scott, I'd do it.
Yeah, you make a chart.
If I were Ron
DeSantis,
cons, I wouldn't.
Put it under pro.
And if I did it like Tim Scott should do it, then you should do it with videos, not audios.
Yeah, I don't know why anyone would leave video. Well, we leave video out, but for a different reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
But this isn't Twitter.
That's true. Also, we could utilize. And when they first came out with the Twitter Spaces, I thought,
if we did video,
maybe we
we'd be on YouTube.
Yes, and yeah, we are. Well, without video, but that may. I don't know. We'll see whether we can address any of that. But we're not running for president, and why he thought that, I don't know. I'm sure there were advisors who, and you may be right. Maybe it is his wife, and maybe she's sort of blind to his incompetence, or at least his real weak points, because
and
she
won't
thinks,
let anybody else who
wife.
actually has better
likes
ideas be involved.
Ah,
that's the key.
Okay.
You don't have to have every idea yourself. You have to have good people work for you, and you have to know when to listen to them.
Where was that nut job Christina Pushaw? Where did she go to?
Yeah, she's just a spokesperson. She doesn't make decisions.
I don't know. She seemed to have a pretty good command of what Twitter was about for a while, but which I don't know. All right, she didn't speak up and stop him. Let's put him on audio only on a shaky platform interviewed by an idiot.
This one is on Semaphore. This is Steve Clements, who often does foreign policy stuff, but he started off with something he called capital D, small e, capital S, disaster.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Ron DeSantis' campaign kickoff blew up on its launch pad as the technical glitches awkwardly delayed his Twitter Spaces chat with Elon Musk for 25 minutes. Nonetheless, the Florida governor is finally running. Shelby Talcott and Benji Sarlin on this platform were able to piece together his starting themes of wanting to end a culture of losing on the political right, defeat the federal bureaucracy where Donald Trump failed, and stop cultural Marxism.
Mm-hmm. Sure, everyone's talking about that.
So, how does what he did help that in any way? Can Ron DeSantis get Republican voters to care that Donald Trump's a flip-flopper? DeSantis and his allies are already pointing out that Trump praised almost every policy they're being attacked over. Yeah, that's going to work.
Yeah, all right. I can't see that happening.
Right, or as Sarlin and Talcott put it, Donald Trump is a shameless flip-flopper. Can Ron DeSantis make voters care? No. That's easy.
To the extent that he does, we should bottle it, but no, I don't think so.
Right. It's been a running joke since even before his 2016 run that Trump has taken both sides on just about anything you can take a side on. No wonder the media loves him.
Yeah.
He's a both sideser.
Right.
But so far, nobody has managed to damage him much. Cruz tried it, Jeb tried it, Marco tried it, said Tim Miller, former top aide to Jeb Bush's 2016 campaign, and a specialist in opposition research. It doesn't mean it won't work in another context, but is it really going to be his old white papers from the Reform Party that do it? No.
Right.
So,
okay, fair enough.
Again, the point is, what is Ron DeSantis' rationale for running? Who's his audience? What is he trying to do to win that audience over? Clearly, it's MAGA people and nobody else. Otherwise, he wouldn't have done this with Elon Musk on Twitter.
Okay.
And therefore, if that's the audience, what is he doing to win them over? And, if he's going to run on competency, I get it done. That's basically his theme. He couldn't get it done.
Yeah. All right. That's
going to stick. It's not going to go away. And that's going to be how he's going to be portrayed for the rest of it. And I still think he's the Governor Scott Walker of Florida.
Okay.
Now,
Yeah.
I have this from the Lincoln Project, which,
those guys.
everybody has their feelings about the Lincoln Project. They're a bunch of never-Trumpers. Some people think they're just grifters. But this is a beautiful letter that they wrote. Okay. It's short, so I'm going to read it to you.
Beautiful, beautiful letter from Kim Jong-il.
Yeah, an open letter to Ron DeSantis from the Lincoln Project, May 24th, 2023. The following is an open letter regarding his announcement.
Right.
Dear Ron, congratulations on entering the 2024 presidential primary process. Running for president is a life-altering event that will challenge your mental and physical abilities to the utmost. But let's cut to the chase. You're going to get destroyed. Your awkwardness, disdain for people, and general disgust with the process won't help while you're shaking countless hands in distant diners or standing in the middle of a fair posing for pictures with a butter cow.
Yes.
Oh, Ron DeSantis' best event, absolutely. Because he'll spend all his time talking to the butter cow.
Yeah, right.
You think you are owed a win, but you've never been attacked like Trump will wreck you. Your height, your recent and sudden weight loss, your terrible political judgment, the bad advice from domineering advisors will all be fair game to Trump. That's a direct hit on his wife, by the way. He's going to go through you like fingers through pudding. You're too weak and afraid of Trump and his MAGA cult members to fight him. It was a brilliant move to announce on Twitter so you don't have to talk to real people or answer real questions. It's just you and Elon Musk. a South African who believes that the radical right deserves their own space to scream racist tropes, promote political violence, and push a bizarre culture war. It won't re-energize your already failing campaign with its fleeing donors and falling poll numbers, but it was worth a shot. By the way, the donors are fleeing and the poll numbers are falling.
Okay.
We've been following your career for a while now, and we think we know you pretty well. We're comfortable calling you an un-American poseur who wraps himself in the flag and military imagery to hide the fact that he's nothing more than a wannabe despot who governs as a bully. Patriots don't ban textbooks, destroy individual rights, and attack companies that don't agree with his policies, but there's no reason this can't be fun. We're sure going to love watching you crash and burn. Sincerely, your friends at the Lincoln Project. So I think they pretty much encapsulate who Ron DeSantis is with that.
Okay.
And part of the reason why it was such a dumb move.
All right. And I like their reference to pudding fingers. So.
Yes. And now in follow-up, this again is from Politico. It's from May 24th, so it's pretty recent.
Yes,
in DeSantis' sunny state, Sunshine State, life is not at all sunny. A lack of affordable housing and rising insurance rates are not going unnoticed. Florida, where unemployment remains at 2.6% and jobs are relatively plentiful, is dealing with a persistent affordability crisis that keeps driving up cost of living expenses, especially when it comes to housing and insurance. It's just one example of how DeSantis' record on these kitchen table issues, coupled with his stance on national flashpoints like abortion and gun safety, is providing his Democratic foes and even some conservatives fodder for a well-funded opposition campaign launching in tandem with his presidential race.
Tell J.D. Vance.
They talk about Jamie Harrison outlining some of these things.
Okay.
A key distinction is the intractable problems looming in the Sunshine State have not gone unnoticed by some conservatives and Republicans. Billionaire Silicon Valley investor Peter Thiel, on the podcast Honestly with Barry Weiss, cited skyrocketing housing costs in South Florida as a reason why he's hesitant to move operations from California to Florida. Thiel said he thought DeSantis would make a great president, but when discussing housing costs in Florida, he said that kind of economic cost is not enough to offset all the wokeness in the world, or even the taxes.
Sure, because housing costs are probably at the top of Thiel's list of problems.
Florida Atlantic University reported that Florida was home to 9 of the 21 most overpriced housing markets in the country.
Oh. Well, J.D. Vance will tell you why that happened.
Former State Senator Jeff Brandes, St. Petersburg Republican, who just launched a nonprofit institute that plans to focus on housing affordability, was skeptical as to whether DeSantis' approach will work. He said Florida needs more single-family housing, and he attributed problems in that area to local regulators. Just throwing money at it isn't going to solve the problem. And then they also talk about the insurance costs. That comes across every once in a while when people mention it, but it's a major role for homeowners in Florida because hurricanes and other natural disasters. Mortgage lenders require homeowners in the state to purchase insurance, but Florida's insurance problem has grown more acute in recent years, fueled by a combination of lawsuits filed against insurers, as well as a series of devastating storms that causes billions of dollars in damage. Hey, climate change? Thy name is Florida.
Yes. I mean, assuming the continued existence of Florida, of course.
All right, DeSantis and Florida Republican, well, until it floods.
Right.
DeSantis and Republican legislators have tried multiple times in the last 2 years to deal with insurance, including using billions in taxpayer money to stabilize the market. But the problems with housing and insurance have opened up a potential line of attack from a web of Democratic-leaning organizations seeking to define DeSantis for voters across the country who may not be familiar with his record.
Yeah, well, and he set himself up for it. If they demonstrate that record successfully and he has branded himself as Make America Florida, and it turns out Florida sucks.
Right.
Well,
and one thing we haven't spent time on today, because there's not that much to say, is the debt ceiling options.
All right.
Going on.
Yes.
Here is, in fact, the Washington Post report, Heather Long writing, here are President Biden's debt ceiling options ranked.
Oh, ranked. Helpful.
Yeah.
Yes.
Number 1, the best thing they could do is a short-term extension.
All right. Yes.
Second, ranked second after that, interestingly enough, either a Senate vote or a House discharge petition. The Senate has left this negotiation up to the White House and House Republicans, but if something close to a 2-year freeze is on the table, the Senate could vote on it first to pressure Republicans.
Oh.
House Democrats have also lined up a discharge petition, which allows a bill to be brought to the House floor with 218 signatures.
Right.
That won't be a clean debt rise. I mean, that's not what the petition is.
I see.
As Liam Donovan, one of the Republican operatives, pointed out, what it is a blank petition, which essentially would allow any compromise that the White House and the Republican House agrees to be placed on it.
Oh.
So it has to be voted on so that the mega right-wing people can't block it, and it's ready to go. And the House Democrats have already said 218 people are lined up behind whatever Hakeem Jeffries does. They're not happy about it.
Yeah,
They're
I
going
can
to bitch and moan and
imagine.
complain and get dragged to the table the way
sign
they
a
did on
petition
infrastructure.
For what? I don't know.
Because it's too right-wing. It's too cave to the Republicans. But this is a situation where a compromise is going to be needed, and it's going to be on spending because the Republicans won the election and they run the House.
Yes.
Even if it's by 2 votes, by 1 vote, that's what it's going to be, and Democrats aren't going to like it, and there's not much they can do about it. They're not going to shake moderate Republicans loose to vote with them on doing what they want. Not going to happen. Now, you could have some people do a Jim Jeffords switch party, I suppose. But I don't see that coming. That would be a surprise. I mean, so this House discharge petition as a vehicle to do something quickly rather than force the Republicans to do the will of the minority Democrats is on the table as the next likeliest thing to happen.
Okay.
That's kind of an interesting analysis, which is probably true. You could temporarily raid the Social Security Trust Fund to buy yourself some time. You could issue console bonds. A console bond is unique in that it has no end date when all the money has to be paid back.
Oh.
So these bonds don't count against the debt limit because theoretically the federal government never has to repay.
Okay, well, that's a thought.
That'll buy you some time.
Yeah.
Invoke the 14th Amendment. It comes in as number 5.
Okay. Number
Biden
5.
could argue the debt limit is unconstitutional. It will almost certainly trigger a legal challenge and call into question whether any U.S. debt issued after that point is valid. That's a problem because you're trying to convince the markets, not partisan Democrats.
Right.
Number 6, mint the coin. So those are his best options in that order. And, what the gossip sheets are reporting, Punchbowl this morning, says basically they're pretty close to a deal, and the Republicans are happy about it. And we know that because all of our sources are Republicans.
Yes. All right. Well,
so that's where things stand, and we'll have to see what happens. So they have time. They have a week. They have some things that they could pull with these funny bonds to buy some time. But stuff's going to happen between now and the weekend.
Okay.
And it's probably going to be a compromise that's going to make some Democrats unhappy, and this is one of those hold your nose, better to do that than tank the economy.
Okay. Well, take
Biden
note.
caved. No, it's not a cave. It's a compromise.
All right. We'll be back next week with more. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Kind of screwed up the timing of the music, so a little bit awkward on the exit. But all right, I don't know what we head to the weekend. Tomorrow can be our crazy long form read show, and then eventually the long weekend ahead of us. We were just discussing. Oh yes, Monday will be Memorial Day, so we'll likely be off for Memorial Day, memorializing things, of course. And, I don't anticipate any real action on the debt ceiling, well, until the absolute last moment. And I still think we'll get one last shot at discussing what's in the offing with Joan before they actually nail it down. Or perhaps, a deal or the outlines of a deal will be in place and we can discuss them with her. And then we can discuss the final moments of the Republic and of the World Economic Order if there's no deal in place on Wednesday. So, okay. Let's see. Things I had to share. Well, there's a million different directions as usual to go in. And I'm trying to see what have I got here on tap. There's a couple of things. Oh, you know what? Now I recall some of the things that I wanted to share with you. Maybe we'll just run over to Pocket and get started on running through some of these various items. But I think I had in front of me, while we were on the debt ceiling, I have in front of me one argument which I thought was actually kind of compelling as I was reading through it briefly last night, coming from the owner of, or the author of the Substack-ish type newsletter / blog, Pwn All the Things, Matt Tate, who is sometimes a little bit brusque and abrasive about things, but does a lot of interesting, offers a lot of interesting takes. And this one struck me. He argues for, I suppose, reversing the preference as between 14th Amendment and minting the coin, which was just ranked for us as number 5 and 6, respectively. And he argues for flipping the script, at least on 5 and 6. I don't know whether he would say that minting the coin is a better outcome than a temporary debt extension or not. Probably not. I think given the nature of the argument that he makes about the coin, I think he too would say, well, it would be a better outcome if they haven't reached an agreement to just temporarily extend the debt ceiling and then try again. But it's an interesting argument for flipping the preference as between minting the coin and using the 14th Amendment. And let's run through it as quickly as possible. A lot of good points are made here. Mint the Coin is the title of the piece, and why the president's 14th Amendment plan is the wrong tool for the job. For the past few weeks, he writes, the biggest problem facing D.C. has been the debt ceiling. It's a uniquely D.C. problem, a completely avoidable catastrophe unless a deal is reached. But if we're lucky, perhaps at the 11th hour, the whole shebang will go away and we'll scrape through with the U.S. having laudably decided not to detonate its own economy and, of course, take the rest of the world economy with it, I might add. Let's see. As with many of these recent artificial crises, this negotiation seems, at least from the outside, to be going rather badly. President Biden has signaled that he's open to looking at ways to dodge the issue, namely by using the 14th Amendment to declare the debt ceiling unconstitutional and to ignore it. Several prominent Democrats are also loudly pushing this plan. Biden is right to want to circumvent the debt ceiling, especially if the alternative is a national default. But, unfortunately, the plan to do it via the 14th Amendment is a very bad one, he says, especially compared to alternative plans like the $1 trillion coin. And I know a lot of people feel the exact opposite and say that it's the $1 trillion coin that's the more gimmicky and less supportable of the two. But as I said, an interesting argument, or several interesting arguments, are put forward here. Understanding the difference in those two plans is a bit involved, so I figured it might be useful to go into them in detail. I think he's right. And why they aren't, well, two sides of the same coin. Yes, superficially, both seek to neutralize the debt ceiling. But one does so in a way that trips through a dozen legal and economic minefields, and the other, while superficially very gimmicky, that's the coin one, is actually very straightforward and a straightforward approach that avoids virtually all the problems inherent in the president's 14th Amendment plan. Yesterday we were reading the arguments that, or maybe the day before, but that were essentially the opposite. And of course adding our own arguments that yes, the 14th Amendment route does have to trip its way through a dozen legal and economic minefields, and I still think the argument holds. Essentially, this has to land at the Supreme Court, and the idea that the Supreme Court is actually populated by a majority who would say, yes, let's bomb it all, let's make money disappear, is probably wrong. I just don't think that majority exists, but it is risky. That's for sure. I understand that. Anyway, but at the same time, there was also a pretty good argument made yesterday, or at least cited yesterday, that the $1 trillion coin likewise trips through the same weird sort of legal minefields. And there's a pretty solid argument that says that there is a majority somewhere on the Supreme Court that might, I guess if the stakes are really the same, I don't know though, whether the stakes are the same in rejecting the $1 trillion coin gambit as it is with rejecting the 14th Amendment gambit for different, and some of those reasons are in this argument. But there was still the issue of the court saying, yeah, the idea that Congress really did contemplate a $1 trillion coin in this Seigniorage Act is pretty unlikely, and we're kind of all about congressional intent, even though we keep saying that we're not. I don't know. Anyway, let me stick with the organized thoughts for now. So, without further ado, what is the debt ceiling? Matt Tate puts it this way. Why does it even exist? What is the president's 14th Amendment plan? Why is it problematic? What is the mint the coin strategy, and how does it work, both legally and monetarily? And finally, let's look at why minting the coin isn't merely a better plan, but also avoids separation of powers issues and renormalizes government back towards a healthy approach to governance, where major changes to the status quo require active legislation rather than having to constantly try and dodge crash by default time bombs. Oh, that's something. In fact, those final points mean I think the president should mint the coin whether or not he gets an agreement to raise the debt ceiling. But we'll get into that in due course. That's an interesting thought too. First, the debt ceiling. Refresher for those of us who've been watching for a long time. The debt ceiling is a legislative limit on the total public national debt held by the United States Treasury. In the United States, the power to raise debt, this becomes important, belongs to Congress and not the executive branch, thanks to Article 1, Section 8, wherein it is said that the Congress is the one that shall have power to borrow money on the credit of the United States. Congress delegates that power by statute to the U.S. Treasury up to a defined limit. The limit was first set in 1917 and has been updated several times since, although now I'm starting to think that maybe there's some room for argument about I suppose you could I don't know whether a court would be willing to do it, but this Supreme Court has approached similar issues this way. They may decide that that's a non-delegable issue after all. Yes, statute has delegated the congressional power to borrow money on the credit of the United States to the U.S. Treasury. But why isn't that something of a separation of powers issue? Why do we allow Article 1 to delegate its black and white constitutionally mandated power to Article 2 Treasury people? I'm not sure that would hold up. I guess if you wanted to talk about the 14th Amendment rendering the debt limit unconstitutional, what about a non-delegability argument rendering the statute granting authority to the Treasury to raise debt as unconstitutional? All right, different argument. The debt ceiling, though, was most recently lifted in December of 2021 to its current limit of $31.4 trillion, and the United States has hit this limit around January 19th of this year. Actually, the U.S. government is now operating solely on its remaining cash balance. It can no longer borrow to get new cash because of the debt ceiling, and its next infusion of tax revenue will occur at the end of June, which will be too late. At the end of April, the U.S. federal account stood at about $350 billion. As of yesterday, it's about $57 billion. Yesterday, in this case, was 2 days ago, May 23rd. Yes, so in a few days, it will simply run out. The exact day is unclear, but on one of the days in the week of, the 5th through the 9th of June, the U.S. will be unable to clear its overnight debt payments for the day, and the U.S. will, for the first time ever, be in actual default. If this happens, U.S. debt will lose its trusted status in the market, and the cost of all future borrowing will price in this new reality. The U.S.'s total debt is very large, so even very small spikes in the cost of borrowing quickly add up to hundreds of billions of dollars a year. A rise in the base cost of borrowing of even just 0.25% translates to about $50 billion a year of direct additional debt payments. Basically, everyone agrees that this would be terrible, but that raises the pretty obvious question, why do we even have a debt ceiling at all? The debt ceiling is, after all, a completely arbitrary figure. It has no intrinsic economic purpose or significance. Increasing the ceiling by $100 trillion does not incur $100 trillion of new debt, nor does it have any effect on the wider economy whatsoever. The ceiling's value, rather, only determines when the next debt ceiling fight happens. And this is its point. The debt ceiling forces Congress to take another look at the issue and provides an artificial negotiating advantage to those who want to extract concessions from the governing party. That's because maintaining the status quo necessarily requires passing new legislation. I don't know if he gets to discussing the date and the timing of when the debt ceiling came around, but I think I'll pause here at this point to remind everybody the debt ceiling, I think, dates to about 1917 or so. That's historically interesting and important to listeners of the show and everybody else in the world. Why? One, we're talking about the run-up of America's entry into World War I here, and Woodrow Wilson having to walk that tightrope and find ways of, keeping us out of war, right, and remaining neutral, but at the same time putting a thumb on the scale in World War I, which has been dragging on forever and looks to possibly be ready to destroy, civilization worldwide, possibly, as the European powers and European colonial powers chew up troops of their own and then start gathering up colonial troops to chew them up as well, and who knows how long this standoff is going to go on, et cetera, et cetera. But looking for ways to put a thumb on the scale, including offering munitions and assistance, despite our supposed neutrality to the Allied powers in World War I, and having people who take American neutrality seriously and wanting to stay out of the war seriously in the United States. And at this point, it's mostly, I think, the progressive Republicans, I think, pushing that. But at any rate, in the Senate, Wilson is facing all sorts of opposition to his plans to, begin maneuvering the United States towards involvement in the war, if not outright entrance as a combatant. But we eventually do that anyway. And he's having to make deals with the Senate in order to get them to agree to go along with this stuff. And remember, of course, this is the war to end all wars. It didn't work out that way, but that was the thinking, and the ideology behind it is making the world safe for democracies. And it's supposed to end in the League of Nations and end all war, et cetera. So there's an existential element to the war, and it becomes, well, now that would, if you believe in that, justifies doing almost anything to direct the outcome of the war in favor of the Allies. So you got to make some concessions in order to get the Senate to come along. And the Senate makes all sorts of changes. There's a lot of change going on in the Senate at this point. One, remember, there's also no cloture rule yet at this point. This is the time at which the cloture rule is invented, and therefore the filibuster becomes more formalized. And they ended up adopting the cloture rule because at this point, there being none, the senators fighting in opposition to this plan to put the thumb on the scale for the Allies in the war are blocking Wilson's ability to pass legislation allowing us to come to the aid of the Allies with war materials. And he needs a way around it. And they, at that point, have to invent the cloture rule. The stakes being, look, if this is a war to end all wars and to make the world safe for democracy, filibustering the effort to make the world safe for democracy is kind of a downer and a little bit of a dick move. And maybe we need to invent a way around this. And thus was born the cloture rule. And this, therefore, all of our problems with the filibuster that have ensued ever since have their roots here, as does the debt ceiling. Another thing, of course, another big problem with involving ourselves in the on the world stage in general, the cost of doing this, the costs of providing this war material to anyone, but allies or not, becomes an issue. And so in exchange for allowing this to go forward, although it took the invention of the cloture rule to actually go forward, but in exchange for an agreement to invoke this new weird thing called cloture, I guess, but to go forward with this legislation, the deficit hawks of the day win the concession of the invention of the debt ceiling. Yes, we're going to take on a lot of debt to influence this war for the future of the world and the war to end all wars and make the world safe for democracy. It's going to cost us a lot, but I'll tell you what, we'll put a limit on how much it can cost us. Okay, as artificial as it was an assurance to senators, as I understand it, who wanted that kind of limitation in order to agree. I'm not committing us to open-ended debt forever, just up to a debt ceiling. And I guess it wasn't envisioned at that point how routine raising the debt ceiling would become. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but that's how they set it up. And that's it. I mean, as he asks, why do we even have this arbitrary figure if the only real effect of it is to give one of the two parties the opportunity to manipulate when the next debt ceiling crisis will occur and use that to maximum political advantage. Why would you invent such a thing? And the answer was, we needed it in order to get to the point where we could actually execute our plan to, influence World War I and its outcome. So that part shouldn't be left out, especially it's tied to the invention of cloture and the genesis of our modern filibuster crisis. So, but again, he sets this up and saying that the ceiling's value only determines when the next debt ceiling fight happens, and this is its point. The debt ceiling forces Congress to take another look at the issue, and you can see how that might have been a selling point in its origin, and provides an artificial negotiating advantage to those who want to extract concessions from the governing party. That's because maintaining the status quo necessarily requires passing new legislation. Now on to the next part of the argument. Notice that this is an inversion of the traditional school book model of U.S. governance. Did you notice that? You should if you didn't. Under that model, major changes to the status quo would normally require legislation passed by the Congress and signed by the president to take effect. It doesn't require the signature of the president, but okay. Legislative time bomb clauses and the debt ceiling invert that normal ordering. Here, instead, the status quo changes unless the president, House, and Senate can all bang heads together and kick the can down the road. When the president, House, and Senate are not all controlled by the same party, and for issues subject to filibuster rules, he doesn't note the connection here, but filibuster rules, even then, without a supermajority, this forces a negotiation that is advantageous to the minority party. They get to hold the country hostage. These time bomb style games of chicken have always been structurally bad. Passing legislation in the United States is constitutionally hard on purpose because it is normatively good for big changes in the governance status quo to require debate and agreement in the political branches. Sunset clauses and debt ceilings both invert this so that maintaining the status quo and avoiding catastrophe is hard and requires debate and agreement in the political branches. That is a perversion even under the best of times. In a time when the political branches are dysfunctional and can barely agree on anything, it's wildly irresponsible. All of which is to say the debt ceiling is not only bad because defaulting would be bad, it's also structurally bad because it inverts the traditional model of decision making and sets the country up to periodically try and disarm a time bomb that the political branches self-evidently are now too dysfunctional to reliably diffuse. That is a strong point, I think. Now, as to the 14th Amendment plan, the administration, for its part, seems to be leaning toward the 14th Amendment solution. So let's start with that one. The claimed authority here comes from the 14th Amendment, Section 4, which reads that the validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law, including debts incurred for payment of pensions and bounties for services in suppressing insurrection or rebellion, and we didn't pay enough bounties for that one, I guess, in January, shall not be questioned. That's the part, right? Shall not be questioned. Now here, the argument is that the debt ceiling is inherently unconstitutional because the debt ceiling legislation means that the U.S. government would be unable to pay its debts. The theory states that since the 14th Amendment ensures the public debt shall not be questioned, that implies a conflict between the 14th Amendment and the debt ceiling legislation. As all school children know, not all, but okay. If there's a dispute between legislation and the Constitution wins. So, under this theory, the executive branch can declare the debt ceiling unconstitutional and borrow straight past the limit. Hooray, or hurrah, as he puts it. If it works. Of course, there was the argument we mentioned the other day that maybe that it doesn't work and that it's not questioning the validity of the debt, it's just questioning your ability to pay it, which is a different thing. But he goes on to say that the problem is this plan doesn't work. Here's why he thinks so. The first and most obvious defect in this strategy is that the U.S. government doesn't just need money in order to service its existing debt. It also needs money for, well, everything else. If the 14th Amendment permits borrowing to avoid a default, and that is not at all clear, it definitely doesn't cover borrowing to cover non-debt obligations like, say, paying government employees or its invoices or Social Security. Even when it comes to the very narrow issue of just raising debts to avoid a default, it's not at all obvious that the 14th Amendment permits even permits that, is how maybe I would have said it. But okay, first, let's dispense with, shades of Marco Rubio, the idea that this is a statute disagrees with Constitution issue, because it's not. He says it's a separation of powers dispute. To execute the 14th Amendment plan, the president would need to borrow against the credit of the United States. That's a power given to Congress in Article 1, Section 8. Congress has only given a limited delegation of that authority to the Treasury. And worse, that limitation is very explicit that the president must not exceed the specified ceiling. So we'd really have to examine this delegation legislation. Although, I guess the unitary executive theory might argue against that and say, yeah, you thought you were giving limited delegation of authority to the Treasury only and not to the president. But as it turns out, those of you who might argue that, say Republicans, you spent the last decade arguing that the unitary executive theory means that the Treasury is the president and the president is the Treasury. And so, you may have set your foot in a bear trap on that. The leopard ate your face. Who knew? Secondly, while the 14th Amendment says that public debt shall not be questioned, it doesn't say how the government must raise money to service those debts. It doesn't follow at all from the 14th Amendment that honoring the United States' debt requires the president to raise some other debts, absent a grant of authority by Congress to do so. That might not be obvious, but here's an extreme example to make the point. If the president decided that a different way to honor the debts was to invade Denmark and steal all of the gold in their treasury, it's an idea. Think about it. Everyone would agree that it's pretty obviously not authorized by the 14th Amendment. Well, I don't know that it's authorized by the 14th Amendment specifically to invade Denmark, but I think other parts of the Constitution would give the president the authority to launch that invasion. Anyway, don't worry, Denmark. I don't think we're up looking for that. Though maybe we should just take Greenland. Anyway, similarly, another way to raise money to honor the debt would be for the president to unilaterally issue a one-off emergency tax on the public without consulting Congress. I think this is a better way to make people understand that no, you can't just do that. Again, nobody would think that the 14th Amendment authorizes the president to do this just because the 14th Amendment says that the public debt must be honored. The same would go for selling federal land or exports of military equipment against Congress's express prohibition. And this is the crux of the problem. It doesn't follow from the 14th Amendment that the president can raise debt independent of Congress, even if it states that debts must be honored. That seems a fair point, I think. But wait, it gets worse. Not only does the 14th Amendment fight get the president into a separation of powers fight with Congress where he might not succeed and does so in order to get money that doesn't even keep most of the government operational. The legal status of all debt incurred past the ceiling under this plan has a very unclear legal status. And I think that's true, and something that Greg mentioned, as a matter of fact. But wait, there's still more bad stuff, and we'll have to get to the other side of the break in order to get the rest of it on the record. But that's the basic question. Would new debt be honored? Maybe, probably. I don't know, nor do you, but most importantly, the markets don't know. And the 14th Amendment won't guarantee it either. Debt past the ceiling isn't public debt authorized by law. In fact, it's explicitly not authorized by law. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Just checking my inbox here, and there's definitely stuff I'm missing out on, but we'll try and catch up on that stuff. Perhaps in the last minutes of the show, or Friday presents the usual excellent opportunity to take care of most of that stuff. But now let's finish up with these interesting observations on the debt ceiling options. Just to recap that last thought, so we can launch into more thinking about it, more discussion about it. Right. Not only does the 14th Amendment option get the president into a separation of powers fight with Congress where he might not succeed, the legal status of all debt incurred past the ceiling under this plan has an unclear legal status. That is to say, if we're saying, well, the debt ceiling is unconstitutional, and we therefore will continue to borrow in excess of statutorily authorized debt, you would then be justified in asking the question, so this new debt that you're raising, is it therefore not statutorily authorized? Is that debt not authorized by law? And if so, is that a different category of debt than we're talking about when we talk about the constitutionally guaranteed debt, that the debt shall not be questioned, or at least debt that's raised as authorized by law, as authorized by Congress, in other words, that shall not be questioned. But this one wasn't authorized by Congress, so can we question that? I don't know. And if I don't know and you don't know and the markets don't know, they'll come up with their own answer, and we might not like that one. In other words, to return to Matt Tate's version of things, when the president raises debt past the ceiling under this plan, that new borrowing is qualitatively different to existing borrowing and comes with all sorts of new risks to the financial institutions purchasing it. And as night follows day, financial instruments that carry more risk charge higher premiums. So, despite all the trouble and limitations of this plan to bypass the ceiling, we will still somehow end up with basically all the problems we were trying to avoid anyway. The government still shuts down, Social Security still doesn't get paid, and the markets lose trust in the U.S.'s debt anyway, and so we still see a massive surge in debt interest rates and increased debt payments. I think that's kind of still a maybe, but it's a dangerous enough possibility to consider. So yes, it's fine, admirable even, to find ways to creatively ignore the debt ceiling, but he says, I'm sorry, the 14th Amendment plan to do it is bad. It's the wrong way to do it. The right way to do it, he says, is that coin. Now, the argument for minting the coin, the mint the coin strategy, or the 31 U.S. Code Section 5112K Treasury Seigniorage Plan, if we want to be very boring about it, is very different, both technically and legally. Here, rather than trying to argue that Congress's debt ceiling is unconstitutional, it takes a radically different approach rooted in the inspired observation that, from the government's perspective, money and debt are the same. This is perhaps not obvious, but here's why. If you buy $20 worth of Treasury bonds, the U.S. government, definitionally, has a debt obligation to you in the sum of $20 plus interest. But if you have a $20 bill in your wallet, the U.S. also has an obligation to you in the sum of $20. It says so right on the bill. They're both a Treasury-backed financial obligation, just in different forms. They don't owe you any interest on the $20 bill, though. So anyway, as with debt raising, Congress has the ultimate authority in deciding how the U.S. issues hard currency. Okay, so this is the part about where we're walking through the plan to see how it works. So, okay, as with debt raising, Congress has the ultimate authority in deciding how the U.S. issues hard currency. The Congress shall have the power, once again, to coin money, regulate the value thereof and of foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures. This authority is separately delegated to the Treasury, which subdelegates it to the Mint for coins and to the Bureau of Engraving and Printing for notes, under a limited grant that precisely defines the types of currency that the Treasury can create, as well as their form and, in most cases, their denomination and maximum circulation. But there is one exception, described in 31 U.S. Code Section 5112K, the platinum coin. You may remember, we read this at some point earlier on when we were discussing the origins of this plan. The Secretary may mint and issue platinum bullion coins and proof platinum coins, I couldn't describe the difference to you, in accordance with such specifications, designs, varieties, quantities, denominations, and inscriptions as the Secretary, in the Secretary's discretion, may prescribe from time to time. Secretary of the Treasury, I guess. The breadth of delegation here is not an accident of drafting, as some might argue, or that the interpretation is far beyond the intent of the drafting. He says it's not an accident. The clause is designed to permit the Secretary to mint special edition coins at any value or design without needing to bother Congress with the specifics. But again, the argument would likely be, well, we thought he meant, $10 and $20 or maybe $100 coins. We didn't even really anticipate $1,000 coins, much less anything higher, and certainly not $1 trillion coins. I mean, it may be that that's the argument. I don't know whether the courts would entertain that argument and say, yeah, you didn't contemplate it. I mean, you could have put an upper limit on it. That's, or you could have said, well, anything beyond a $10,000 coin requires the consent of Congress. But you chose to leave it open-ended for some reason, and we can't necessarily pinpoint what that reason was, but putting an upper limit on it was probably pretty obvious and probably even discussed, and you opted not to do it. So I can't help you. I'm not going to artificially construct an upper limit. That's the counter argument to it. The breadth, as he says, as he puts it, the breadth of this delegation is not an accident of drafting. The clause is designed to permit the Secretary to do just this without needing to bother Congress with specifics. I mean, it was a bad idea, perhaps, but they did have that idea and pass it. While its drafters expected that to be for collectible coins, not actual like currency in circulation, the secretary can absolutely choose to make high-value coins, yes, even trillion-dollar coins, if she wants to. She doesn't even need any particular reason. She just can. Congress gave her that power. The only restriction she faces is that the coin must be made of platinum and that it must otherwise operate like any other coin. So, why does minting a trillion-dollar coin help with the debt ceiling? It all comes down to the way hard currency is accounted for inside the federal government. Once the secretary authorizes the creation of a trillion-dollar coin, the mint creates the physical coin itself, probably with a lightly modified commemorative coin design and an existing platinum coin blank. The mint then takes that physical coin across town and deposits it at the Federal Reserve. As with all other coins deposited there, the mint is then credited with the coin's seigniorage, i.e. the face value of the coin minus any costs incurred in creating it. The Fed then holds the coin as an asset. Notice that in economic terms, nothing has really happened here yet, at least beyond the small dollar costs of the metal and the bureaucracy in processing it. But in accounting terms, the mint has just been credited with $1 trillion into its account by the Fed, and the Fed balances its balance sheets by holding the $1 trillion coin as an asset alongside all of its other multi-trillion-dollar assets. The $1 trillion payment to the mint is operating surplus for the mint, which, like all government department operating surpluses, is deposited back to the Treasury General Fund. Armed with this new money, the Treasury can spend it to keep the government operating and to satisfy its debts, invoices, wages, and other obligations. There's two easy mistakes to make with this plan if you're not careful, so let's tackle these now because this plan doesn't give the executive branch free rein with the money and it doesn't have a direct inflationary impact. On spending authority, this doesn't touch or upend Congress's budget power. The new $1 trillion ends up in the Treasury General Fund, but it isn't the executive branch's money to spend as it pleases. That still requires congressional appropriations. This plan lets the executive branch dodge the debt ceiling. It doesn't let it dodge the federal budget. On inflation, isn't this a case of printing money that will trigger hyperinflation? No, he says, and not just because it's stamping the money, not printing it. When countries that perform unchecked currency printing spiral into hyperinflation, the proximate cause of the spiral isn't printing the money, it's spending it. Here, that's not the case. Counterintuitively, even if the government is making new currency, its total spending after minting the coin is identical to what its spending would have been with just a vanilla debt ceiling increase. It's inflation neutral. This is more visible if we use an extreme example. More extreme examples. Ready? Suppose the government were to mint a $999 trillion coin and not just a $1 trillion coin. Here the practical result is that the federal account will have a very large number in a database. But no other economic effects are occurring anywhere else. It doesn't impact anyone else's money. The coin isn't in circulation, and it doesn't change the budget, at least compared with simply raising the debt ceiling by any other means. And so it's no more or less inflationary than any other mechanism of raising the debt ceiling and spending at the current budget rate. Of course, if Congress decided to start spending the $999 trillion worth of money through giga appropriations, then yes, sure, that would be hyperinflationary. But that'd be inflationary whether it's funded by seigniorage or by external debt. It's the spending, not the financing, that triggers the inflation. And just as importantly, that's not something the executive branch can do independently of a congressional appropriation. In short, the whole mint the coin scheme is just a very elaborate accounting mechanism to restructure some of the debt to be Fed managed rather than Treasury managed. And that's because one of those debt piles has a congressionally imposed maximum and the other has a congressional grant to the Treasury Secretary to mint coins with an unlimited upper value. That's all it is. It's fancy accounting wrapped around a physical coin. It's not got any wider economic significance beyond that. It's a little heady, but it makes some sense. But while minting the coin feels a bit gimmicky and undignified, and it is, it serves several very important purposes that the President's 14th Amendment plan does not. First and foremost, I guess most importantly rather, it uses a delegated power from Congress in a way that is explicitly authorized, even if it was a bit of an oversight, in contrast to using a congressional power in a way that is explicitly unauthorized. That sidesteps the separation of powers fight that the 14th Amendment plan would otherwise involve entirely. I guess the only real hole in this is the one that overshadows everything, which is that at a certain level of constitutional law and interpretation and jurisprudence, i.e., at the very political Supreme Court, it's all anything goes. No holds barred. All the rules are out the window if the court decides they need to go out the window for good reason or bad. And so, you can always, if you need to, invent a new doctrine that says this is not a separation of powers issue anymore. You all thought it was, and it was a very well-reasoned essay, but we're about to just declare it not to be the case. Just as I'm about to declare it no longer against the rules to operate a power mower directly outside the window while I'm doing the show. That no one's listening to me about that. So I might as well just make it policy. All right. So where were we with this one? Yes. So yes, it's true in the current sense that the coin plan sidesteps the separation of powers fight that the 14th Amendment plan would otherwise involve entirely, unless, of course, the court decided to say, I'm not sure exactly I can explain it and it doesn't make any particular sense, but it's my opinion, and there are 5 others who joined me in this, or at least 4 others didn't join me in this, saying, today my opinion is that this is not a problem under separation of powers, or that it is a problem of separation of powers under the coin option. It doesn't make any sense. I can't get there logically, but if you just declare it to be the case, everything gets stood on its head. So that's one of the problems with dealing with extraordinary examples in the con law context with political actors who don't feel bound by logic. So I just want to throw that warning out there. But he's operating, in the old model where logic makes sense. The second great thing, he then argues, is that it's very limited in scope. Congress can, if it chooses, amend the law to withdraw the authorization from the Treasury Secretary to mint trillion-dollar coins. A bill to withdraw that authorization, perhaps in exchange for repealing the debt ceiling, for example, is entirely possible. And if Congress does not withdraw the authorization, there is no opportunity, or even if Congress does not withdraw the authorization, there's no opportunity for executive misbehavior here. Federal spending is still firmly limited by congressional appropriations. This isn't magic money for the president to use as he pleases, unless the Supreme Court just says it is for some reason, and has no effect on the rest of the economy beyond what would be the case if the same spending were debt financed rather than money financed. Which I guess raises the specter of, I don't know, if for some reason Ezra Klein was right and the Supreme Court really is inclined to be completely MAGA-style QAnon nuts and would opt to destroy everything by undermining the president's authority, whether it was the 14th Amendment plan or the coin plan for that matter, then I guess if he's right that they would do that, then this plan, the coin plan, carries all the same risks as the 14th Amendment plan in terms of legal and constitutional pitfalls. You think it doesn't make sense, and you're right that it doesn't make any sense that you should consider, that you could consider the coin option to have the same problems. But if all it really takes is literally just the opinion, whatever that means, of 5, and you think they're political actors and the worst kinds of partisan political actors, then there's really no guarantee no matter what your plan is. I mean, I guess at that point it's a toss-up and all things are basically equal. Take your pick. Pick your poison. The Supreme Court is perfectly willing to strike down either one. Then, yeah. So you really can't come away from an argument like this and say, this one puts the courts in a box and this one does not. Nothing puts the courts in a box except themselves. They have to want to climb into the box and stay there. Now, I happen to think that that's where they want to be in certain cases. And this issue may be one of them. So I have a feeling they'll want to stay out of the way of this one, but I could be wrong. All right. So where were we here? Yes. The third great thing, he argues, is that it stabilizes the national economy by diffusing the national debt time bomb permanently. Changes to the status quo, whether for better or worse, can and should always be done through affirmative legislation. And it is bad enough that Congress puts time bombs in its legislation. It certainly should not put another one under the economy as a whole. This diffuses that bomb forever. Well, it diffuses the bomb. This one bomb. Does it do it forever? No. He just mentioned in the previous paragraph that Congress could end up repealing that Coinage Act or putting a cap on things. So I'm not certain that you could ever issue $1 trillion coin ever again. Maybe you want to make it a $100 trillion coin just to kind of cover that possibility. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't do anything forever. Nothing is forever. Especially if, as we said earlier, if the previous section buys into the notion that the court can just say, to hell with your understanding of everything, I'm standing it all on its head, nothing is forever. And given that Congress can manipulate its own rules, and sometimes the Supreme Court will pointedly jump out of the way of intervening, I guess, maybe just nothing is forever. So maybe that's overselling the point. The next benefit is the delegation of authority to the Secretary of the Treasury's total discretion means that there are very few avenues to appeal her decision. There's one. The Supreme Court could just say, we'll do it. It's fully hers to make. The executive branch doesn't stamp on anyone else's toes to do it. It's not only plainly lawful, it also doesn't implicate anyone else's interests. It's not clear who, if anyone, would have standing to oppose it. And I think that's probably an invitation right there to imagine Supreme Court mischief as a possibility. You say they don't have standing, but did they say no one would have standing? Or the opposite? I mean, they may just want to lay it down by saying, we'll reject. That's a convenient way out of the case if they want to avoid it. But if they want in, all they have to do is invent standing. And there doesn't have to be a good or logical reason for it. They have offered standing to lots of people who have no real claim to it. And the final great thing about this plan is it simply doesn't involve the markets at all. All existing debt is honored and no new debt is created with any type of uncertain legality. Unless, of course, they say there is some. There's no new uncertainties for the markets and nothing for them to reprice or to price gouge to take advantage of the crisis. It just averts it. Finally, if anyone in Congress happens to be upset that neutering the debt ceiling undermines their ability to redebate the topic of the total federal debt, then on that, too, I have happy news. Both chambers of Congress independently have the power, if they wish, to create new standing committees or rules in their respective chambers, or to periodically compel new debate on the topic within their respective bodies through congressional rules. They don't need a time bomb under the economy to force internal debates about overall spending. Of course, that is, if you look at it just right and squint just so, an invitation to reinvent the same crisis-making device, but under a different name, so it's a little bit self-defeating. But, there's no perfect plan once you realize that anybody can pretty much authorize anything if they're willing to abandon logic and simply do it for partisan reasons. But okay, in short, ending the debt ceiling is a very good idea. Defaulting would be catastrophic. But the 14th Amendment, he says, is the wrong tool for this job. It is true that when you're trying to defuse a bomb, you sometimes have to turn a few screws, but that doesn't mean you have to use a spoon to do it. especially if there's a screwdriver lying next to you. If a deal cannot be reached before 0 hour, and honestly, even then, the right answer is clear. You just gotta mint the coin. All right. It's some interesting thoughts. Let me add this to the mix just before we leave for the day. I happened to see on Mastodon this from Gotta Laugh, pointing out that via Mike Walker, I guess the reporter in this case, the Gop, apparently, in the Senate, now threatening, this is a weird confluence of concepts given the discussion we just had, threatening to filibuster on the debt ceiling in the Senate. They do, he says, want to blow up the economy because they think it will help them. The insurrection continues. Here's the quote from Mike Lee saying, I will use every procedural tool at my disposal to impede a debt ceiling deal that doesn't contain substantial spending and budgetary reforms. I fear things are moving in that direction. If they do, that proposal will not face smooth sailing in the Senate. So I guess it only makes sense that they would come back together again, these two concepts that were born together in 1917 and 100 and something years later going to collide again. But we'll see whether there are 41 senators or 40 other senators who will stand with Mike Lee on that one. I mean, they've got them among the Republicans, but there are certainly some people who would not mind avoiding the crisis. But Mike Lee needs to buy himself MAGA credibility again. All right. Well, let's see. Just a few minutes left before we exit for the day. Anything? Well, let's see. Let's take a quick look at what we put away and decide what we could do shortly. Gosh, almost nothing. But I do want to set something up for tomorrow. Here's a short story that we can use. But for tomorrow, we got to get back to more localized issues. Ken Paxton, Texas Attorney General, faces some real troubles as, well, here the Texas Tribune is reporting. I just got to read you the headline. Investigators detail years of alleged misconduct by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton in stunning House committee hearing, which is a short way of saying that even Republicans, even Texas Republicans, are signing on to and issuing this report that says, yes, Republican Attorney General Ken Paxton stands accused credibly of years of serious misconduct in the Attorney General's office, not just stealing pens at the courthouses, by the way. We got to get to that, but we got to wait for tomorrow to do it. Here's something I might be able to sneak in before the end of the show and make Matthew Rigdon happy, putting us back on a Tucker Carlson beat, something he sent to us from The Wrap. This is funny. Fox News collects studio equipment from Tucker Carlson's home in Maine. They took everything, is the quote. Yeah, I guess they must have outfitted him with a remote studio so he could continue to produce shows for them when he was staying at his vacation home in Maine, and he just held on to it like it belonged to him. He's entitled to it. They own it. They took it back. Of course they did. They're not going to let you use their money and their equipment to produce your stupid Twitter show, right? The erstwhile Tucker Carlson Tonight host will reportedly have to rebuild the entire setup from scratch. Not that he can't do it, but you might as well make him do it. Let him spend his money on it, not Rupert Murdoch's. Josh Dickey reports this for The Wrap. We'll get through as much as we can. Fox News sent workers to dismantle and remove much of Tucker Carlson's home-based broadcast set in Maine. The Daily Mail reported on Wednesday, if you can trust them. The latest twist of the knife in a bitter divorce between the former Tucker Carlson Tonight host and the cable network. The studio was built in a converted barn on one of Carlson's properties, where he taped Tucker Carlson Tonight and other shows for Fox News and Fox Nation in the summer. A person with knowledge of the situation told The Wrap that Fox owns the equipment and installed it at the network's expense and rightly removed it, but did not tear down the studio. That wasn't theirs to do. In any case, the Daily Mail reported that the studio will have to be completely rebuilt, according to the construction manager. Fox came in last week and got all of their beep out of there. I'll beep it myself. Patrick Feeney, who said he's managing on site, told the paper. They took the set and everything, and all the equipment, the chairs, the desk, the fake walls, everything. Carlson was just a few weeks from moving to his summer home, where the studio is located, when he was abruptly fired from the network for reasons that are still not entirely clear, but seemed to be stem from a combination, I guess, of the $787.5 million settlement with Dominion Voting Systems, a separate discrimination lawsuit by one of his former producers, and embarrassing text messages and other communications that came to light in discovery or were leaked from an unknown source. Both Fox and Dominion have steadfastly denied a connection between the firing and the settlement. The newscaster announced earlier this month that he'd be bringing a version of his show to Twitter, I wonder if it's audio only, but has released no further details and is still unlikely, or rather still is likely, under a $20 million contract with Fox News that will make launching a new project potentially legally dicey. I don't know if he cares about that, but I get the point. The Daily Mail said Tucker retained his own crew to get the studio up and running again, a process that will take some time as infrastructure repairs are now necessary. It reported seeing a 3-man construction crew on the property busily building away. That's actually the end of the story. We did manage to get it in before time runs out. That certainly ought to make Matthew happy. So give us short blasts about Tucker Carlson for good reason. I'm glad we could keep up on that one. That one seems, that's just fun to watch fairness work there. The guy's been operating on the Fox dime all this time, and if he's gonna, if he's getting kicked out, he's going to have to do this stuff for himself. He's certainly got plenty of money to do it, but yeah, make him do it all over again. All right. Well, that wraps things up for today. We have tomorrow's show left to get back to Ken Paxton and other fun topics. Plus, of course, we owe you a couple of Rosalind McGregor segments, so we'll try and get those on the air. And in the meantime, Justice Putnam takes things over next with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, starting with, look at this. When asked what was his hardest decision, the balls and strikes Chief Justice fenced himself in. Let's figure out what that's about by listening to the show. And then, up next, Klamath County, have I pronounced that correctly? Oregon's public library book clubs have been canceled because a resident complained it was indoctrination. Karen lives in Oregon, too.
You've been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
How about this? Republican state lawmakers want kids to fill labor shortages, even in bars and on school nights. And Republicans, because they're Republicans, the investigation found Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton committed multiple crimes, including felonies, over many years in office. Let him fill in the blanks for you until tomorrow.